Hello, hello YouTube. How are you doing this fine evening? Well, it's evening for me. I wanted to talk to you about straight sword and dagger synergies, and there's a couple ways we can go about it. For one, R2 with a pokey stab sword will often let you hit people with an offhanded dagger, and then you can add Ashes of War just to mix it up. And we're going to go over those right now. So first off, it's going to be R2, L1, square off R1, right? That's one synergy you can do. R2, L1 into Sword Dance is another synergy, and then Storm Stomp, Dagger L1 into another R2. Now, these aren't combos by any means. Oftentimes, the last step in any of those synergies will be a roll catch, and that's what makes playing with the sword and dagger so much fun. There are so many caveats, though, into this line of thinking, but first I want to show off the first synergy really fast. So we got an R2 into L1 into R1 square off roll catch, and it chunked him pretty good. It was pretty nice. And of course you can alternate using your dagger and your sword, and it'll do wonderful work. The synergy I had the most trouble with was probably the sword dance variant of this string. I don't want to call it a combo because it's not. It's more like a way to get successive hits and roll catch. So we got the stab into knife into sword dance, and it does good damage. Even on when they have mean old latency, if you're getting some of those hits, you can be pretty oppressive. But something to keep in mind is if somebody has a substantial amount of armor, you may have difficulty. So anyone you can bully with a single straight sword, this is likely to work. And now for the final synergy, Storm Stomp. So this guy is bowing to me, and I just wanted to show off the synergies I was talking about in action, even though they're not perfect. Latency and armor pending, but you can stomp, dagger, and roll catch R2, and that is tasty. That gets people on the defensive, and you can just go about it that way. I wanted to play on the Sir Samuel Vimes level 90 strength build, and then I was like, well, I use straight sword on him a lot, and I have fun with that. And I had a commenter a while ago talk about how he felt that Sir Samuel Vimes should use an offhand dagger instead of two straight swords, and I kind of agreed with that. Though, anyone familiar with those books I'm referencing, Sir Samuel Vimes will do anything to win the day. So getting back to this footage you've already seen, we hit him with the R2 knife into square off R1, we finish off him, and then we'll have this nice little fight with this fellow where we have a stupid little endure off while I explain the caveats of the build like I've mentioned previously. So I did this on a strength build. If you want this build to be very effective, I would recommend that you throw it on a dexterity build and probably use lightning infused weapons, though Keen will do you just nicely. And you wouldn't want to use the Cinquedea or whatever my sidearm is called, that dagger. You'd want to use the, what is it called in this game? The wakizashi? The short little dagger katana. Have that in your offhand, and then you can have a long sword in your main hand if you want, or even the noble slender sword if you want. Either will work just fine for our needs. You want a straight sword with a lunging R2. That's what you want. And so if you were to throw it on a dex build, it would make significantly more sense, but that's if you wanted to center the whole build around it. This build is meant for much more than that, and so that's why we have that little problem there. I didn't know what infusion to use exactly. Heavy for piercing would be nice if you can get those counter hits, but because we're not two-handing our weapons, I wanted a little extra oomph per hit, so I opted for the fire infusion, and that worked fairly well anytime it wasn't raining or people aren't rolling through puddles. Now that that's out there in the open air for you to dwell on, I hope you enjoy the clips I have for you. I focused the vast majority of them on the sword and off dagger combo for your enjoyment. Of course, what's on screen is not one of those, but this was the rest of that invasion, so I thought I would include it for continuity's sake. I'll do a little better on the future ones. I think I'll only occasionally deviate for like when I use a great bow, of course, because I can't help myself from using a great bow. Another caveat for using a straight sword and an off dagger is that it's a little rough for invasions. It feels more like a dueling setup. A dueling setup that has a lot of control and a lot of fun. I really like the flavor of using a straight sword with an off dagger, or a dagger in the offhand. I understand why everybody uses paired straight swords. It's because it's easy and it does a lot of damage. But having an off dagger is pretty neat. It's kind of opened my eyes to the possibility of having an off dagger on more setups, and that's something I will need to explore. I know plenty of people use a light thrusting sword, for instance, in their offhand, and more power to them. Off stock or a light thrusting sword in the offhand is terribly strong and a little bugged right now, so I understand why it's such a popular choice. But a knife is a lot less weight when you're, comprising a build, especially a build that's not at meta level. And it has a slash, so that's kind of neat. So I kind of want to experiment more with off dagger on other builds, as well as maybe even the little hand axe, the little hatchet you can get in the Mistwood from the merchant there. Because that is also fairly lightweight and comes out quick and has a nice little slash to it for an offhand weapon. Shamshir can, of course, do that as well as in the offhand. But I like this idea of power stancing, but making sure they're not in the same weapon family. So it's not really power stancing, but using two dissimilar weapons that are not just a halberd and a clean broadsword. Anything else, because I like the flavor of it, and it was good. It was nice to know that I had an extra option as opposed to just whatever's on the one-handed straight sword moveset. Though there are times where I felt like I would have loved to have a shield or tried to go for a parry. That wasn't the point of all this. But sometimes if you notice people have light armor and they may not have a Bullgoat's Talisman, sometimes at point blank, like that 2 hits I did with the knife, you can just kind of bully people with just a one-handed knife if their poise is that pitiful. And, a lot of people recommend that you should have, 41 poise? I'm forgetting the poise meters. Yeah, they recommend you don't go into invasions with less than 41 poise. If you can, hit 53, and then like 68, 69, until eventually the next break point for poise is 102. So it's like, don't go into invasions when you have less than 41 poise, otherwise you'll get bullied by daggers. But players don't care, so you can bully them. Oh, did you see that Phantom? Run it back. The Phantom, poor guy, rolled off the cliff while I was just having some fun, and I tried to go for another thunderstorm, and the other guy rolls off the cliff. They had oppressive numbers, they were aggressive, they had everything on their side. Honestly, they may have even won that invasion, or that little fight, that interaction, but they didn't, because they both rolled off the darn cliff, and now I get to bully this poor wizard and just try to play with the different combinations that can come out of having a straight sword and a knife. And I've never used Storm Stomp to stop a spinning slash before. That's never occurred to me. I'm not much of a Storm Stomper. But being able to use Storm Stomp to repeatedly interrupt somebody who just wants to mash their way into an L2, it was fun. I'll admit, it's a neat little thing you can do, and when their poise is that low, you can do it. And to be fair, you need, like, what is it? You need more than 100 poise to tank a single Storm Stomp. I don't know if it's 101, 102, or 103 right now, but it's a lot. That's a lot of poise. It's quite the investment. And at level 90, it's not that common. It's not that common. I like the level 90 bracket. I like the idea that you're just shy of a full build, or rather you do have a full build, but you don't have like all the fixings and the dressings you would normally get at your level up potato bar. But I like level 90 a fair bit. I had plus 20 and plus 8 somber in terms of weapons. So standard, somber, 20, and 8 in that order, respectively. I've heard of some people playing with plus 17 weapons with plus 7 somber at level 90. I've always done that at level 80, so I don't know. But then again, some people play at level 80 with plus 15 weapons, so I'm not really sure what the most activity is. I felt like I had a grand amount of activity at level 90 with plus 20 weapons, so it worked for me. I was also playing during prime time hours, so I was having a good time, not always trying to hit Europeans with my swords. And it was nice to focus, all in all, on a very non-meta setup. It was very refreshing to have these fights and to stretch my brain case a little bit, try to think up new ways to win the invasions, and I'll admit, the Great Bow was a little bit of a crutch, but thankfully I don't use it too much. I didn't need to use it in every invasion. I rather liked the setup all in all. It gives you a fair bit of control, and you just gotta be aware that you're not the biggest shark in the tank, but you can be one of the meaner ones. And every time I play with a single straight sword, because I don't really use a straight sword in two hands, I feel like the moveset's not as great. I noticed that if I usually have a shield, and as a result of having a shield, the parry is always an option. And usually when the parry is always an option, I don't get to use the Ash of War on my sword nearly as often. And so that's one of the problems when you go sword and board normally. But using a dagger in the offhand, it was far more reasonable for me to use the Ash of War on my straight sword and even have other straight swords on hand should I need to swap to something else should the need arise. It honestly makes me want to get much better at my swaps so that I can go between a parry shield and a no-skill shield so that I can have access to my Ashes of War. It's a very good thing to have on hand. I'm loving the straight sword life, and I wish I had appreciated how cool and useful straight swords were back in Dark Souls 3. I felt like I didn't do that nearly enough, because they were very reliable. And now they're a little bit of the underdog. They're not bad per se, but there's so many strong setups that can just outdistance you, outpoise you, and if you don't have your head screwed on right, like this poor guy who's just taken all of my hits. I was getting tired of him mashing the first part of L2 over and over. I was just like, you know what? You look like you're wearing light armor. Have some R1 spam. And it worked way too well. I felt stupid afterwards. I'm like, did I win because numbers instead of brain? And yes, it's true. I did win because of numbers, not because of brain. And those things happen. Those situations occur. And so you should try to do what you can to make sure you have better numbers for when your brain fails. But this invasion right here, I decided to keep it because it kind of was a good example of how in a confined space, a straight sword can be a menacing weapon. I can just kind of keep up the harassment every time I go for an R2. If I was smarter, I would have gone for a dagger hit. And I forgot during this invasion that that's the core. Even if you don't use an Ash of War, even if you don't use Storm Stomp, if you hit somebody with the R2 of the straight sword, a lot of the time, latency depending, you can hit them with the knife real quick. And there's risks to that, of course. Sometimes they'll come out of hit stun too quickly. They'll take the knife hit, but then they'll just counter hit you with something beefier, depending on what kind of kit your enemy has. But it's nice that you can do an R2 into an L1, and then you can hit them with the square off or the sword dance. Or you can mix it up, hit somebody with a Storm Stomp, Dagger into Roll Catch, R2, and it's just a lot of flavor. It took a little bit for me to cement in my mind, you know, those little hit combos, because I was not much of a single straight sword user, I suppose, when mixing them with Ashes of War and an offhand weapon. That was not something I had done prior to recording this video. Tangential to what I was just talking about, something I learned that I really liked is the running light attack on the straight sword. I almost always just use the running heavy attack because I want the stagger, right? I want the stumble. I want them to stop for a moment. That's why the heavy attack is so vital on lighter weapons, for getting that other guy to stop in his tracks. But if you have somebody who's not really intent on exactly hitting back, they're trying to get away from you, the running light attack on the straight sword ain't too shabby. Watch this pot. Oh my gosh. Did you see him? Run it back. That's so silly. He like teleported sideways like 30 feet and behind the rock after getting hit with the frost pot. I think he outspaced the gravity attack from the Falling Star Beast, but something about getting hit by the frost pot right there at the end of his life not only killed him, but jettisoned his body sideways at a unprecedented speeds. It looked like an instantaneous transmission. It's kind of silly. Either way, I hope his death wasn't painful in any regard, because that sure did look painful. Anyways, I was glad to be able to use a straight sword and a knife in the offhand. It was a great growing experience, and I have other clips that I couldn't use for this video that just feature the strength build at level 90. I'll need to figure out a good use for them, so stay tuned. More is in the works. Some spicy bits of content coming right down the chimney this holiday season. Hopefully before Christmas. However, my lawyer has asked me to refrain from making any such promises to you, dear viewer. But it does make me think, what sort of peculiar weapon combinations do you like to use? Is there some weird weapon you have in one hand and an odd weapon you have in the other hand that you like to use? Tell me about it. I know another one I like to use is a cleaver in the main hand, like the iron cleaver with its running attack, or rather its heavy attack that mimics a running attack, and like a halberd in the offhand. That's a silly combination I like to use. It's not fantastic, but it's fun. So what is your funky weapon combination? I want to hear about it. I like seeing the uniqueness that some people dream up. It's always those people who do the weird stuff so readily that I respect the most in the Souls community. The people who just do the wacky and zany stuff that just doesn't make any sense. Or maybe it's just a little harebrained. You know, the people who aren't slaves to the meta. And that's not to be mean to people who like the meta. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good, it works. There's a reason for that. But it is neat and refreshing to see the opposite. Do you see how delayed that frost pot was? My goodness, derailed my train of thought. Right, I was talking about weird stuff. Another odd combination I saw the other day was an invader who's using a greatsword. I think it was a claymore in their main hand, and then they were using like a normal spear in their offhand. Not a lance or something that's busted and gets extra hyper armor one-handed in the offhand. They were using like a pike or something. And I thought that was so weird, so bizarre. And I kind of want to try that out too. So let me know what you've got, and we'll end that thought there. We're closing up on the video. I think this is... Yeah, we have 2 more clips for you. My goodness. I included this fight, even though the fight against the host was kind of lame. I won. It just wasn't a fun fight to watch. He was very avoidant and healing all the time when they kind of wanted an honor duel, and I gave it to him, so whatever. But the fight against his phantom, oh, it was a neat little fight. I liked fighting this guy. He's using weird weapons. He's using those poor shodels with the death blight that does nothing. It just feels so bad. But did you see that? That was it. That was the storm stomp into knife into roll catch R2. And oh, it was delicious. It was tasty, and I gotta thank that fella for letting me get the string off on him. It's not a real combo, or rather the only combo part about it is that storm stomp allows me to hit it with the knife. The R2 is the roll catch. I'm gonna get those mixed up. I hope you'll forgive me my insolence at mixing up roll catch chains and combos. Because for some reason my mind believes the combos anytime you can get hits in rapid succession regardless of rolls. It's just not what it really is. Did you see that pro gamer move? That guy blocked my great arrow to save the host. It was like a get down Mr. President moment, but I've got wall hacks, so I was able to hit him with a rain of arrows through the wall, and now I can deal with this little bit latent host trying to figure out where his ping is at. And so we hit him with the R2 into the knife, into the, oh no, square off gets interrupted because latency plus greatsword gives him bizarre powers. So next we go for the square off R2, and it hits him right in the latency, and he takes no damage, but we get this tasty string, and that is where we will leave you, dear viewer, hopefully very enthused. Bye-bye now.